All right. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to this session on LEED version 5 through the lens of water, put on by the Supply Chain Sustainability School. Thrilled to have you with us today. My name is Wendy Carradine. I'm the operations manager for the Supply Chain School here in the US. And I'm just going to take us through a couple of housekeeping things before I hand it over to Erica, who's our presenter for the day. Just very, very quickly, this session is being recorded. If you are in attendance today, you're going to get a copy of not only the recording, but the slides as well, with some email information about some additional resources and a link to a survey, which will also pop up at the end of this webinar. So strongly recommend that you fill out that survey. It takes 2 minutes. It's very helpful to us. So please, if you could take a moment of your time, I'd be really appreciative. If you are participating in this webinar today, you are obviously a member of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, which is awesome. You will receive CE credits for attending today, and you will also get a certificate of completion, which will pop up in your dashboard, which you can access at any time. If you do not receive your certificate, please reach out to me and let me know, and I will be able to take care of that for you. I will, like I said, I will be sending out the email with all of the information from today. So if you do have any problems, please reach out to me. My email is wendy@supplychainschool.com, or you can also reach the team at info@supplychainschool.com. And just really quickly, I am talking to you from New York Climate Week. So if anyone also happens to be in New York for Climate Week, I'd encourage you to reach out and say hi. Would love to connect. So finally, this is obviously a Zoom call. If you do have any questions or anything that you want to mention in the chat, I would very much recommend that you use the chat function or the Q&A function. We will answer questions depending on what they are in real time, so don't be shy. Please put them in the Q&A chat, and I'll be keeping an eye on that. And if you want to use the chat function, would love to know, who you are, what you do, where you're based. I think that would be really just a fun way to keep the conversation going. So don't feel like you need to hold the questions until the end, but we will have time for Q&A when we finish the slides as well. So all of that being said, I'm going to now hand it over to Erica Weeks, who is our presenter for today. She's the Director of Green Building Certifications at Paladin. Really knowledgeable person on this subject, so I'm thrilled that we have her here for the afternoon. And yeah, take it away, Erica.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all making time in your day to come and talk a little bit about LEED version 5 and how we look at it from a water standpoint. A little bit about me and my background, just really quick so that folks have a little context. I've been on the USGBC's water tag since 2022 and sitting as the chair 2024 through 2027, which will sort of end my tenure on the water tag. So I've been through the whole LEED version 5 development process and understanding from the market what we need, how to move the needle forward. And again, if we talk a lot about LEED, we understand that it is for market transformation, right? It's not your average run-of-the-mill project that can just pick up and do some things. So how do we push the boundaries? How do we have these different conversations? And as you see, I'm a lover of learning. I really love rating systems and understanding standards, guidelines, how to facilitate conversations around sustainability generally. So understanding where people are at, if they've used LEED version 4, 4.1, if they've gone all the way back to 2.1 to version, for many, many years, and understanding how that trajectory has happened is really interesting to me. And being able to also cross communicate. I am an architect by my licensure in my sort of first half of the year before I sort of changed into or morphed into more of a sustainability consultant. But it was mainly because of my drive to illuminate for people how we can create these synergies, how we can talk amongst project team members in different ways that help us move a project forward versus staying in our silos for things that we can only control potentially through our own disciplines. So today we're going to talk about specifically LEED version 5 and specifically water and how sustainability in LEED version 5 needs to have a little bit of a broader context and a broader look as we also think about what we're putting sort of in the bike rack in version 5 to move the market forward to what happens in version 6 and versions beyond. This really creates a really great dialogue between project team members and understanding what credits and what metrics we could go for in maybe some potential new ways. I know folks love to talk about the flush and flow rate of their plumbing fixtures, but now we have a bigger, broader, whole world of water things that we can start to address. And how this impacts our industry is also really important because we want to not only think about product based solutions, but those holistic design solutions. So today we're going to talk about some of the key updates for version 5 and look at where some of the variations from version 4 are and how we would sort of tackle those. Looking specifically also at how the interrelationship between the water efficiency credits and some of our sustainable sites credits could be better utilized if we start to have different conversations with some of those different project team members. And how are we looking at these meaningful water related goals for LEED? Now, you're going to see on the LEED version 5 scorecard, there is a tiny amount of points available for water, and we're trying to expand that and try to capture other creative ways to think about water, so that people understand it as a resource, a limited resource, and how we can best utilize this information that we're gathering through version 5 and how we can inform version 6 in the future. So there's a couple key things with LEED version 5 updates. If you've been watching, as LEED version 5 launched at the end of April of this year, there were a few key things that through the development process are really strategic. Moving to a 5-year development cycle, so launching version 5 in 2025, giving us a target date of 2030 for version 6, and 5 years beyond that, version 7. It gives us our runway, if you will, to understand where the market is today, what kind of projects are under development, who's using what types of credits, how are they using those credits, and how are they best making waves, pun intended, to move the rating systems forward for the next versions of LEED. Because right now, even though version 5 has just launched, we're already having lots of dialogue about how pilot credits will move the needle on potential version 4 and 4.1 projects right now to get that critical market feedback from you all using the rating system so that we can then better understand how credits can develop for version 6. This is really strategic and important because, again, that market transformation, we need that feedback from people using the rating system. And if we wait for folks to register a version 5 project and say it's a really big, like multifamily, high rise in New York City where Wendy is today, it might be 5 or 6 years before that project gets built. And that's a lot of time before we can actually get that feedback. So how do we start creating a little bit more of that cadence and a little bit more of that understanding? This is really strategic also just because we want that data and we want to make sure as we also move into the performance side of operations and maintenance, our buildings, how we design them, how we're actually thinking through those strategies at the beginning. Are they really performing and how are we reporting on that data? In version 5, a platinum project just doesn't need to just only earn 80 points. There's some strategic energy related credits that have to be utilized, and that's not a topic for today, but something that if you're seeking a higher level of certification under version 5, you want to pay close attention to. And then also just the launch of some of the new tools to help have project team conversations be helpful and understand how we can, again, move these things forward because it's all about that market transformation. Now, when we look at the key themes, you might have been familiar with the previous versions of LEED talking about like the triple bottom line or the three-legged stool, right? Of having environment, economy, and being able to have that sort of synergy between the middle of those three spheres be that sustainable development. In LEED version 5, new lenses were utilized to look at the characterization of certain credits and points. 50% or so of the points are looking at decarbonization strategies And these could be everything from specific, really related to energy, but looking at embodied energy of materials, looking at refrigerants, looking at transportation, quality of life. How are we designing projects and buildings that actually are supportive of people enjoying where they're working, enjoying where they're living, and not just making those environmentally friendly, but actually making those a place where people want to save and preserve, right? And then specifically 25% of the points being about ecological conservation and restoration, and being specific about how are we looking at our ecosystems, and not just of our project site, not just of our parcel that we've been assigned to look at, but what that development that we're doing on that parcel is actually, how is it impacting the greater neighborhood, the community, the watershed? Like, are there things that we should be thinking about in that broader context without just looking at sort of what happens within that little parcel of what we can develop? Are there things that we can improve upon or make better for our neighbors sort of downstream? And this all ties to how the new scorecard has been developed, and understanding where different impact areas, where these key themes tie to certain prerequisites and points. Now, if you're familiar with LEED and LEED version 4, this is a very familiar scorecard to you, especially if you see my little indicators on, or maybe some version 4.1 upgrades have occurred on this particular scorecard that we just drafted here. But keeping ahead of understanding what credits you've done in the past, what prerequisites require, and how those are moving forward. You're not going to see a ton of change in some of the parameters around some of the credits, and then in other aspects you're going to see some really exciting and some really great enhancements to particular credit strategies. You're still going to have prerequisites. Those are the required, always given, have to do them, do not pass go, cannot do LEED if you don't meet those prerequisites. And then you're going to have those points, those credits that earn points basically at a scale. Specifically today, we're going to hit on a few topics, particularly for water and the water efficiency category, and how it's adjusted a little bit as we move that needle forward. So on the version 5 scorecard, you will see little indicators for that decarbonization, quality of life, and ecosystem conservation restoration as you work your way through the credits, to understand how those lenses, how those ideas are infused within particular prerequisites and credit language. That's really important to think about, because if you're also doing a larger strategy session with your client, they might lean into one particular sort of zone of thinking or that lens versus another. And you can use this as a quick guide to understand how you might be able to impact them in ways that might be a new way to measure things, right? From a how many people are being productive, or how many people are loving that workspace. Particularly today, I'm going to talk specifically about the rainwater management credit, which is still under sustainable sites, as well as cover the items in the water efficiency category. You'll see that there's 2 prerequisites still in the water efficiency category, and we'll go into detail and talk through some of the different credit language surrounding those. I do encourage you to look at the scorecard in full. Like I said, there are many enhancements, again, moving that needle forward, trying to push that bar to understanding where people are at today, to how do we get them to think about things in the future. One key thing I think that's interesting is also just thinking about how all of these credits can knit together also. For example, when you're thinking about your material selection for your particular project, you may want to start to consider how that material, not just from an energy standpoint, but how that material is also utilizing water within its process and how it's being made, and understanding at a little bit deeper level of how this could impact what we see come out in version 6. A little bit more on the scorecard is you'll also notice there's a new project priorities and innovation category, which sort of bundles together what was before the regional priority credits and the innovation points, where you could pick from the innovation point credit catalog versus come up with other credits from other rating systems. This was a strategic decision also to let people have the ability to be able to think creatively within their local community, their local geographic region, with things that are very much of a concern, to be able to write their own credit as well as use a credit from a library of things that would be innovative or exemplary performance. And as these still get shaken out during the next couple of months, probably before Green Build, it is really interesting to think about if there's strategies that aren't showing up on the scorecard or things that are really important to your project types. How might you capitalize on using some of these points in an innovative way because of what your project is looking for and needing to respond to for that local community or for the occupants? Now, looking through this lens of water, again, we looked at the scorecard a little bit, and, you know, sadly, the version 4 scorecard had 11 points for water, and now we are down to 8. We can arm wrestle some of the other tag members, the other technical advisory groups, for how points got reshifted and reallocated. But it is important to understand that there are places on the scorecard where you have to have those synergistic conversations with other team members to be able to start to think about how water even falls on your site and what you might do with that water versus just, again, elevating that conversation beyond that flush and flow fixture. What do we need to specify from a gallon per minute, gallon per flush conversation? So when we look at the scorecard, particularly, there's still the rainwater management credit, which in previous versions of LEED was called stormwater management and was broken out between quality and quantity. And through the evolution for version 4 and 4.1, came into this rainwater management credit, which is a substantial number of points, as well as a substantial regional concern for a lot of folks on how they're managing water that falls on their site, because of different considerations that allow for people to collect, store, reutilize, or not send that water down sort of the pike to another, cause a flooding issue or cause some other issue. And then, of course, our water efficiency credits for water metering, minimum water efficiency, metering and leak detection, and enhanced water efficiency. And there's lots of options to be creative about how you utilize and earn the potential of 9 points here. So, what about water? Not specifically in this version 5 do we talk about the water energy nexus or the water carbon nexus. So within the last at least 10 plus years, if not greater, we've become really good at talking about energy and talking about site energy, which is from our building meter into our building. So what you see on your utility bill, versus source energy, which is the energy that is generated, transmitted, and then arrives at our building. And we've understood a lot more about our grid system in the United States of when we're talking about like a zero energy building, are we talking about it from a site energy or a source energy? And what are the relationships to how that energy is created from a carbon impact standpoint? So how come energy, of course, has been the hot topic and not necessarily water? So water, if you look at many of the municipal reports in many of the areas of the United States, the amount of energy, the amount of utility bills that your local water company might pay to create potable water for your use, your consumption at your building, goes through a really, really laborious process of having cleansing, having pumping, having collection, having re-cleansing. And each step of the way, it takes energy to get you to that point where you have that potable water service. I anecdotally like to tell people I saw a dishwasher tab commercial for a cleaning tab that they were enticing you to wash your dishes even if your dishwasher wasn't full every single night. Go ahead and pop that tab in and let it run. Well, my dishwasher doesn't know if I have two dishes in it or if I have a full load in it. It's still going to use the same water. And I realize there are some other kinds of dishwashers that might have a little bit more complexity and drawers and things like that that might be able to run a half load or things like that. But I started to dig in and feel really bad when I understood how much energy, how much carbon was I using, even if I was only using 4 or so gallons of water to run that dishwasher load and it was empty, to get that water to my house, being 8 or 9 miles from our local water plant. So this is not in the current text of version 5, but we are working on a pilot credit to be able to apply to version 4, 4.1, and version 5 projects to start thinking about why we need to think about this water cycle and how the energy is used, how the energy along this chain to get potable water to a project site might impact how you want to think about also how you may collect or reuse water on a site to sort of eliminate part of this chain. In version 4 and 4.1, we had a really great level of assessments from a site assessment standpoint and from a climate resiliency standpoint from some of the pilot credits that were based on some of the resiliency assessments that you could look at. The site assessment worksheet was also very useful in that it helped guide you to look at your site holistically and understand all the benefits that your site might have. This included being able to associate how much water could be infiltrated to your site, how much water could be runoff to your site, how much water could be collected and reused on your site. And this remains in LEED version 5, a way for you to start your conversations about your rainwater management credit. So in LEED version 5, very similarly to version 4 and 4.1, we are trying to reduce any of the runoff from our site, being able to capture on site, you infiltrate, use that natural hydrology, use that water in some other way based on percentile storm events. Those percentile storm events are a little bit different than thinking about your annual or your monthly rainfall. But what LEED version 5 is looking at is also giving you sort of a bonus point for water reuse. And if you're actually capturing and reusing water on site, how you might be able to capture a certain percentile storm event and then get a bonus point, an extra point, because you are reusing a quantity of water based on that calculation. The percentile storm event calculation hasn't changed. It's still looking at your 10 plus years, if 30 years, that would be great, of your precipitation data and running the percentile calculation into the calculator that allows you to say what your percentile storm event would be. Here, I'm in Middle Tennessee, and typically a 1-inch storm is a typical design standard from a percentile storm event. So I'm asking my design teams often, can we look at that 1.11, right? Getting up to that 85th percentile storm event, which is different than looking at your monthly precipitation, where you have the ability to look at differently what you might be getting on a monthly basis from a volumetric standpoint that you then can collect, reuse for things like toilet flushing or irrigation, and how does that align with what those water usage needs are on your project. So again, a very good activity in from a site assessment standpoint, as well as starting to think about this calculation before a lot of design has gone into where's the parking lot, where's the parking garage, where's the building placement, and how can we start to think about these different volumes of water in ways that we could then have the ability to have the conversation about reuse. So this is important for that rainwater management credit, but it very much ties to your water efficiency credits. Now, similar to version 4, you are going to have the requirement as a prerequisite for whole building water meters to be able to understand that total consumption of your building water. And that total consumption is not just the building, but it's the associated grounds and any other uses that you might have. This hasn't changed. This is something that has been in version 4 and 4.1 with the commitment to being able to share that data on a monthly basis as needed via the spreadsheet or through Energy Star Portfolio Manager when you add the USGBC to your Energy Star Portfolio Manager account, and then be able to understand at that holistic level how much water you're using. Now that does tie to another credit we'll talk about in a minute. We're again looking at subsystems and understanding maybe some of your different your water end uses. Now, where the big change has happened in the water category for version 5 is optionality to how you might pursue the prerequisite as well as the credit to earn those potential 8 points for being water efficient. So a lot of the conversations through the development of version 5 was, is prescriptive good enough, or is performance good enough, or should we still have both? Because there's obviously a lot of different project types out there that would need perhaps some different ways to understand what a hospital needs versus what an office building needs versus what an industrial project needs, and giving people the optionality of looking at some different pathways to hopefully understand what they're designing and then implementing was a big discussion and a big collaboration of how are people earning these points currently today and how do we move that needle forward. Because again, we want to talk about not just flush and flows. We want to talk about all the water that's being used in your building and how the building grounds, how all of that water could be associated. So when we look at the prescriptive path, which might be from a prerequisite standpoint, an easy button for projects that might be a little bit more straightforward, not a lot of process water use, things that you would just pick, right? You would tell the folks who are picking the plumbing fixtures, here are the target levels that we should be looking at. Here's what we need to meet from a specification standpoint. Or you can still do, as we can do today in version 4 and 4.1, a calculation based on performance, looking for that 20% savings with the mix and match of the fixtures that you have and that you are looking at. Again, it might work really good on some projects, like a healthcare project that might need a little bit more water for hand washing from the authority who has jurisdiction, and we can save some on the flush rates or vice versa. So again, that little bit of mix and match versus just being prescriptive. There's some other criteria to the prerequisite, but just allowing for that optionality was really important as we then elevate to the enhanced water efficiency credit where you can earn up to 8 points. Now, if you look at the version 4 and the 4.1 credit today, right, we have a percentage of thresholds that earn a point based on you meeting, the 25%, 30, 35%, those different pieces of percentage savings based on your fixture combination. But what that's not doing is also looking at other water uses in your building. So again, as we're thinking a little bit more holistically around how are we going to drive the carbon metric towards understanding how much energy, how much carbon, how much are we using to how much are we expending to get that potable water to our building, we just can't be talking about flush and flow rates on many projects, right? We have a lot of process uses, we have HVAC uses, we have things that, are consuming a lot of water that aren't necessarily just our flush and flow fixtures. So what the new credit in version 5 has done for enhanced water efficiency, it's given us, again, options where we're going to look at the whole project water use. So again, looking at every water using system in the building, combining it all together. So you're looking at your irrigation, you're looking at your HVAC, you're looking at your dishwashers, you're looking at the flush and flow fixtures, and bundling that up. That was a pilot credit or an innovation point, alternative compliance path through version 4 and 4.1 that achieved really good success, especially on projects that had more industrial type uses where, I had customers look at me and say, we can save all you want in the flush and flow of the restroom, but that doesn't, hit any water savings that we would have due to our manufacturing process or due to the water that we use on the line. So there are things like that where it's like, that was an aha moment where it's like, okay, yeah, flush and flow rate is great. That's something that people can sort of see, touch, feel, but there's so many other water uses out there, and how do we capture that? So out of the success of that pilot credit emerged this option 1 for whole project water use. So currently we're using the same calculator from the pilot, but there will be additional calculators that come out towards the green build later in towards the end of 2025. The other pathway is created by some of the other options where you're allowed to look at how specific fixtures and fittings, appliances, that outdoor water use, cooling towers, mechanical process water uses, and then also creating some alternative water strategies could be bundled up. And again, this is a decision point for a particular project that might have appliance process water use. Maybe there's a heavier usage for some types of equipment. Maybe there's a heavier usage for irrigation, and having the conversation and the discussion point about which path to follow. At the end of the day, you're trying to save water, right? You're trying to save that so that you come up with what your total water would be for the building. But this gives you, again, sort of that optionality and that flexibility to understand where projects would be able to comply. The 1 point credit for metering and leak detection, it's actually, you can earn an exemplary performance point if you do both options. This walks you through sub-metering, similar to what's in version 4 and 4.1 from a system standpoint. What systems do you really want to isolate within your project building to get a better handle on what your consumption of water is, and understanding how that information would be really useful to the building manager, to the understanding where that water source is really coming from, if it was something that could be alternative versus if it has to be potable. Those types of gathering of information, again, project specific, would be really great. And then leak detection. So a lot of times, the most water that we use is understanding where also things might be going awry, and how are you either looking at how much water you're using for different systems from a leak detection standpoint, or being able to look at abnormal flow rates. I'm pretty lucky here in again, Middle Tennessee, where if my water company, my water utility sees that I've had a big spike, they call and they say, we think you're using a little bit more water than you normally would based on your historic trend. Like, is there something going on? Do we need to send somebody by? And the 2 times that they've called, we have had a leak out by our meter in our yard. So we've had that corrected and be able to understand that. But without their sensor detection system out by our meter, we wouldn't have necessarily, we just thought maybe we'd had a higher bill, right? But this is something where we want to not waste that water. We want that water to go to what we need it to go to. So having the ability to understand that information is really important. Circling back just a little bit on the enhanced water efficiency to unpack that a little bit more. I already mentioned that that whole project water use, that 1 to 8 points, um, that could be your entire calculation, your entire amount of your water use on your building. So if you have a really efficient process system and you've had the process engineer, give you a 50 or 60% savings, maybe that's where your water points are going to come from versus bundling up some of the other options together. The point scale for option one, it reads typically as a 20% would be your prerequisite savings, and then a scale 30 to 65% up for exemplary performance, inclusive of if you're going to have some alternative water uses. And alternative water also, we debated on several fronts of what we call, how do we define alternative water? Meaning, it could be rainwater collected on site, utilized. It could be condensate water collected and reutilized. So it's really how things are creating water that we can then collect and reuse. And we landed on the word alternative versus any of the other choice sort of words out there. I'm trying to also align with some other industry standards that talk about the use of alternative water, and also how, as again, the industry moves forward and we understand where we can reutilize some of these different water-based systems in a more enhanced way or a commercialized way, leaving it sort of flexible so that we can understand where you grab that water from and how you are reutilizing it. When we get into the option two and we start to get through the picky parts of how to earn a few different points and maybe add up to that 8, this is where we're talking about, again, going back to everyone's favorite flush and flow rates, right? Something easy to understand, something that can be specified, something that we can, go to our a building and wash our hands and flush the toilet and understand from a performance standpoint. We like the performance of those particular flush and flow rates, and allowing that calculation to happen sort of independently just for those fixtures and fittings. Allowing for outdoor water use. Now, there's a big change here in the way that the calculation is done for those who are familiar with version 4 and 4.1. We've typically been using the WaterSense EPA calculator that allows us to look at plant types and the different types of spray heads and drip irrigation. The theoretical irrigation requirement is a different way to calculate the amount of water that is needed. And they'll be publishing a new calculator. We've tested it out on the tag side, taking historic projects and putting them in to see what the threshold, if you're still at a 50% savings or if you're at a 30% savings from a 50% savings. So just note that to get that 50% savings, you will be looking at a little bit deeper dive for how efficient your irrigation system will be versus just basing it off of maybe some plant types and some other criteria that you've looked at before. Then looking at process water use, this is for those, again, familiar with version 4 and 4.1 for cooling tower cycles and the concentration levels of some of the different components that happen to be in water that maybe change the type of chemical treatment or the type of cycling. Still in this version of LEED, a possible for 1 to 2 points, depending on the number and type of concentration that allows for you to have the number of cycles available. And again, the complexity here is actually just getting that water test to understand what that water analysis allows for as part of the design of the cooling tower. There's sort of an option to this also where you can, if you don't happen to have a cooling tower, or if the cooling tower is a different system, you are allowed to look at a few other minimum drift, which we've had on version 4. And we also, how do we look at different water cooled chiller systems? things like this, again, depends. You may or may not have it on your building. So again, from a strategy standpoint, if you don't have a system 7, 8, 11, 12, 13 per ASHRAE, this may not be an option to you, and it might limit some of the points that you're available to get. And then similar to what's in 4.1, if you're using alternative water, again, for some other purpose, you, in your process water, especially if you're using it for like a boiler or some other process that is available to you on your particular project site, if you're using that alternative water, you can also achieve some additional points based on that process use. And not to leave just alternative water out altogether, but there is an option, a 1 to 2 point option for having the ability to, in the future, have an alternative water in use, meaning you can have your building set up to potentially connect one day. For example, we work a lot in some states that have purple pipe systems, and that purple pipe water is able to be connected to things like a flushing toilets or a cooling tower. And if you know that's coming, I know, a lot of the California regions talking about their recycled water systems. We wanted to be able to leave that open for people to have the ability to potentially connect in the future. And then also, of course, as you use alternative water on site, be able to have your irrigation, your flush fixtures, any makeup water that's needed, and go ahead and get rewarded for using that alternative water right away. So that is the LEED version 5 water category. And I hope this was helpful, at least as an overview to folks online, to be able to understand the credits a little bit more and understand, there are some deep conversations that should be had pretty early on to understand what systems and what ability you have to perhaps capitalize on some of these points in a different and new way than just talking about your toilets and lab faucets. So I don't know, Wendy, were there any questions?
Hi, I'm back. No questions in the chat. I think I had a couple questions that I just wanted to
Mhm.
raise really quickly. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about how the point system has gone down slightly from LEED version 4 to version 5, to version 5 rather. Do you see it going back up for version 6? Do you see water taking on more of a role in LEED in the future?
It depends on how much we arm wrestle some of the
Mm.
other groups for the points, because there's such an emphasis also on energy and materials. There was some shifts that were made to capitalize on what, again, the industry is very focused on materials, and the
Mhm.
industry has been very focused on energy. So I would hope that for version 6, especially as we begin to connect and tie a lot more of our water use to the carbon side, that it would be, we need people to do that total water and understand all the water they're using to be
Mhm.
able to move that needle to understand what is the carbon metric associated with that potable water, to then help encourage more alternative systems. So we hope in the future that there'll be, again, a little bit of shifting between how those points. But again, it's also like the conversation about categories in LEED when so many things are synergistic. It's
Yeah.
kind of like,
You can't talk about one without the other. Yeah.
right, you can't always justify that, oh, I'm only doing this for water when I really
Hmm.
am doing this for also materials, or I'm doing this for energy. So
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah.
that kind of ties into my next question, which is obviously we're measuring and monitoring a lot of different factors when we're talking about LEED. Do you find that there's any tools that you find useful when someone's going through and going, okay, well, how do I manage my points? Where am I looking? How do I focus my data collection? Anything that you would recommend?
No specific tool. Typically, I mean, we're still using a lot of dialogue around spreadsheets and a lot of dialogue about how early do we get on a project,
Yeah.
right? Because the ship sails, if you, again, one of my Erica puns on water, but like the ship sails, right? Like if the decisions are made early about like how the project building is situated on a site, that might not leave a lot of room for improvement when you talk about stormwater and rainwater.
Yeah.
Um, so there are those types of things where, again, if we can talk about it early, even if it doesn't pan out to be a good idea for the particular project, it's still the conversation about what's the goal and what's the idea, behind collecting water and reusing water, and how do we actually make that, baked into the project versus make it also look like a sustainability thing that's added on, right? And it kind of has to be embedded in that first pregame conversation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, quick reminder, if there are any questions from the audience, happy for us to address them if you want to drop them in the Q&A or directly into the chat. But if there are no other questions, I'm just going to leave on asking you, Erica, if maybe you can think of an example or a case study where maybe an architect or designer or a building or a project, really went above and beyond compliance and sort of took those maybe from V4 or
Yeah.
V5, really just went whole hog on those points and addressed all sort of stormwater management issues, water
Mhm.
usage issues, and anything you can think of.
So yeah, I was fortunate about a decade ago to work on a private residence that happened to have a personal pool in the basement of the house,
Oh, must be
and
nice.
it was a saltwater pool, and it was a smaller size, but we were able to put two cisterns within the basement where, when the pool water had to be changed, we could drain the pool into one of the cisterns,
Okay,
which
cool.
that cistern would then be able to feed the irrigation that was needed around the property for all of the landscaping. And when we did look at it with the landscape architect and a couple other folks about, like, oh, we're putting, salt, and we're putting, as long as we were zoning so that we weren't spitting out that first, spit of water to the same plant all the time,
Hmm.
it became like a really great reuse story. That house also had a pretty extensive gray water system. So we were collecting all the shower water, um, in the laundry, into the cistern as well. So it was getting sort of a mix of things. But it was pretty cool just to think through the workflow of the process and be like, what are we going to do with all this water when we have to drain the pool? Right. And I was like, well, that water, it can be diluted with some of the other water and go on all the plants. And then I don't have to pay any money to buy water to irrigate. And I was just like, why not? Why wouldn't we do this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so frustrating. I'm thinking about that and thinking how I could apply it to my house. Obviously, I don't have a pool in my basement.
Right.
Would
Well,
love
yeah.
to, but
Wouldn't we all?
I
Wouldn't we all? Yeah.
wouldn't
Yeah.
we all exactly? No, I live in a city called Hamilton. I'm just outside of Toronto, Canada, and the city implemented an initiative for increasing suds and urban drainage on your own personal property, and then they completely walked it back, and it was so disappointing.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
allowed people to sort of keep grandfathering in, like, oh, sure, you
Yeah.
can expand your driveway. Oh, sure, you can
Yeah.
pave over your front lawn, and it was just, yeah, it was upsetting to see,
Yeah.
but.
I think that's something too that people, when you think about your parcel, when you're an architect or a designer and you're given, like, this is my parcel, it's like
Mhm.
just having that also broader view of, like, well, what's going to happen to my neighbor, down the street, or down, or creating some of those other systems that you're thinking a little bit more broadly about. It's like, can we share some of this infrastructure so that, like, I'm not just utilizing or trying to make my property better and then getting water from somebody else's property just washing into it, so
Exactly,
that's a
exactly.
big conversation.
It is for sure. Well, listen, thank you so much, Erica. And thank you to all of you for taking time out of your afternoon, morning, wherever you are based. Thrilled to have you on this session. I found it really, really useful and really, really informative. If you do have any questions that pop into your head after this session, I would strongly encourage you to reach out, and I'm happy to either put you in touch with Erica or send it to one of our other SMEs. Like I said, all of this information is going to be sent to you after this session. Yeah, I would strongly recommend you check out our upcoming events in the Supply Chain School event page. And we hope to see you at a future session. So I'll close by saying thank you, Erica, for your time and expertise. And it was wonderful to hear you speak. And thanks again for attending. And I hope to see you guys soon.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.